So today's speaker is His Grace Mahavishnu Prabhuji. We are very fortunate to have him on the call. So Prabhuji, are you present on the call?
Yes, I hope everyone can hear me very well.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept our humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj. Thank you so much Prabhuji for your valuable association. So now you can start the class Prabhuji. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances to Srila Prabhupada and all of the Vaishnavas. Hare Krishna. A lot of devotees from Charlotte. Maybe it's time for me to move to Charlotte, North Carolina. So let's begin. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuramalitam Nena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutalam Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminati Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shanyuvari Paschatya Deshatarine Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 3, text number 18. Na tadrishanam svajanavya grihanprati yat anavastitatmanam Yabhyagajan bhaktudhiya bichakshate aropita bhubiramarkyanakshibhi. Translation. One should not go to anyone's house, even on the consideration of his being a relative or a friend. When the man is disturbed in his mind and looks upon the guest with raised eyebrows and angry eyes. Purport. However low a person may be, he is never unkind to his children, wife, and nearest kin. Even a tiger is kind to its cubs, for within the animal kingdom the cubs are treated very nicely. Since Sati was the daughter of Daksha, however cruel and contaminated he might be, naturally it was expected that he would receive her very nicely. But here it is indicated by the word anavastita that such a person cannot be trusted. Tigers are very kind to their cubs, but it is also known that sometimes they eat them. Malicious persons should not be trusted because they are always unsteady. Thus, Sati was advised not to go to her father's house because to accept such a father as a relative and to go to his house without being properly invited was not suitable. This is a very easy verse to understand. There's not a lot of dense philosophy here, which is good. It's easy to go through it, to unpack it, and understand it. This story is very dramatic. There are a lot of things going on here. There's people are dying, there's cursing, there's counter-cursing, people are getting different animal heads, and so on. So it seems like a very dramatic, it is a very dramatic story, a very dramatic telling of what it means to engage in aparad. But just because the telling is so dramatic, we should not fail to realize how much this suits our own reality. In our own families, it's common that we may have strained relationships, right? Strained relationships with maybe cousins, uncles, husband and wife even, in-laws particularly. Not as dramatic as what we see here with Daksha and Sati, right? But oftentimes there is tension between certain family members. And what we can understand from this particular verse is that even though there's different tensions between different family members, it is very, very important that we do not exacerbate such tensions. Exacerbate means we do not increase or fan the flames of such resentments and such issues. Because, and I don't want to go too technically involved here, but Shiva is giving the instruction here that when we are encountering someone who is inimical towards us, when we're encountering someone who is angry towards us, harbors resentment towards us, we should not give that person more reason to engage or to stay in that mentality. Krishna even talks about this in the Bhagavad Gita when he says to Arjuna on numerous occasions. Here we're going through the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna is telling Arjuna, talking to Arjuna about detachment and not being attached to the consequences of one's work. And in explaining this, Krishna tells Arjuna, while I'm saying this to you, you should not try to induce people who are not aware of this knowledge. Krishna uses the term ajnanam. Krishna says you should not tell the ajnanam, the ajnani person, the person who is not in knowledge of the absolute truth, tattvavid, you should not induce them to stop working. You should not induce them to try to renounce the fruits of their work because they do not have tattvavid, they do not have the understanding of absolute truth, of absolute reality. Later on in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna again mentions that for persons who do not have faith, or persons who are envious, the secret, the confidential knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita is not to be given. It is not to be spoken. Because this only arouses the conditioned living entities' animosity. This arouses their enmity. This arouses their negative temperament. And this is very, very detrimental to their spiritual development, right? When people are in this mentality of resentment and anger, it hampers their spiritual development. But even so, even in our daily family interactions, when we have family members that there's some resentments, there's some tensions, we should do whatever we can, in fact, to ensure these do not remain the norm. It's very important we understand this. I don't want to go too much into these details, but just so we get a clear understanding of how effective or detrimental negative thoughts are. We know that every thoughts we have in the mind is uncontrolled. It has so many different thoughts, right? In fact, studies have shown that we have over 70,000 thoughts every single day. How they measure this, I have no idea. But apparently the mind, or we are capable of, on average, having 70,000 different thoughts throughout the day. What is interesting is that we know from the Vedas is that these thoughts are actually, they create samskaras. Samskaras means impressions. These impressions are stamped upon the shukshma shirya, the subtle body. So every thought that we have creates a small impression on the subtle body. So when we are in the company of persons who have negative feelings, who have feelings of animosity, these thoughts that they're having are creating samskaras, not only on them, but also on us. Have you ever walked into a room and someone is saying, you catch someone saying something bad about you, or you hear someone has perpetrated a rumor about you, and you get some negative feeling. That negative feeling is a samskar. An impression is made upon your shukshma shirya. When you walk into a room where you encounter someone who has feelings of animosity towards you, both yourself and the other person are experiencing a samskar as being made, an impression upon our subtle body. These samskaras, if they are not purified, if they are not eliminated, they develop into a vasana. Right? And we know this also, Krishna alludes to this in the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, Dhyato Vishayam Pumsa, right? While contemplating the objects of the senses, we develop an attachment. This is the same principle. We have over 70,000 thoughts a day. These thoughts become impressions. The more attached we are, the more emotion involved in these thoughts, the deeper these samskaras, the deeper these impressions. These impressions then turn into vasanas. Vasana means tendencies, proclivities. In other words, they become the preferred or the prelude to our actions. When we have a tendency, a proclivity, a strong desire towards something, we begin to work towards acting on that tendency, on that proclivity. So these things start out as thoughts. They become samskars, impressions. The deeper the impressions, the more emotionally involved these impressions become, especially if we think them over and over and over again. If we're holding some animosity and we think about this animosity time and time again, the impressions become deeper. They develop into vasanas, tendencies. These negative tendencies then take root. And very soon after that, we begin to act on them. Now, this is not only for the person who's having the thoughts, but for those of us who are the object of these negative feelings. So Shiva is saying to Daksha, don't go there, because he's had these negative thoughts towards you, and it's going to harm you. Both persons are harmed. Both parties are harmed when there's these kind of negative tensions going back and forth. What we can learn from this is in our own lives. Again, it's not as dramatic as the story here of Daksha and Sati. But in our own lives, when there's tension in our families, it is very important. We have to understand that we are also Vaishnavas, not just to talk about samskaras and vasanas and all these things, but we are Vaishnavas. And as Vaishnavas, when we're in a situations where people begin to offend Vaishnavas because they have some pride they're dealing with, they have some of their own conditioned mentalities, when they have these feelings of animosity towards Vaishnavas, it causes a detrimental effect on their devotional, on their spiritual life. So as Vaishnavas, we have to be doubly aware of how we are walking through the world, how we are going about our daily activities. Because if people encounter us and have negative feelings, negative reactions, it is actually a detriment to their devotional development. It is a detriment to their spiritual development. This is as important in our own families. Our husband, our wives, our children, our extended family members. We must be careful to ensure that we do not enable them to engage in Vaishnava Parad, right? Not that we are pure devotees, but we are servants of Vishnu. We are aspiring servants of Vishnu. So when our family members do not appreciate, have some animosity, some feelings of animosity towards us, it is actually causing detriment or harm to their spiritual development. So we should be mindful as Vaishnavas in our own, particularly in our own families, especially in our own families. In fact, our preaching, our most powerful preaching, should be done within our families. It is done within our families. Our family members are the first persons who will be affected by our devotional and our spiritual life. It is very important that the family unit is conducive for everyone's spiritual development. When my mother joined ISKCON in the early 70s, my mother is the youngest child of my grandmother, and she's the youngest of 7 siblings. I have 7 aunts and uncles. And she was the only one who came to Krishna consciousness. And when she chose to do so, all of her brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles, and my grandmother, they were not very supportive. But she carried on anyway. When I got older and my mother wanted to send me to Gurukula, there was a bit of a revolt in the family. I didn't understand this. I was too small to understand this. But later on, as I got older and I was visiting my uncles and aunts for the first time after many, many years having not seen them, I was in my early 20s. I remember my mother telling me, she said, Mahavishnu, a lot of your aunts and uncles and cousins, they have a unfortunate opinion of Krishna consciousness, and your grandmother as well. And she said to me, I remember this very clearly, she said, if you get them to love you, they will come to love Krishna. I want to say this, back in the early 70s, when a lot of devotees were joining ISKCON and Krishna consciousness, the prevailing idea was when there were parents or family members who were not supportive of becoming devotees, then the families would try to get the devotees out of the temple, so on and so forth. And sometimes immature personalities would call family members demons. And they would demonize these family members who were having a hard time letting go of their daughters and sons and giving their sons and daughters to Srila Prabhupada. So a lot of family members were demonized. This is the backdrop of what I had understood of how to deal with family members who were not appreciative of my being a devotee. So when I first came back from Gurukul, I graduated from Gurukul, I was going to see my family again. My mother told me not to interact on that level. And it was a very profound lesson she taught me. She was saying, get them to love you and they will love Krishna. That's the most important thing. And I did my best to do so. But that's the principle we should try to live by. There are always going to be members of our family, in-laws, cousins, extended family, friends, who may not be supportive of our spiritual practice. That's fine. But we should always try to get them to at least are as persons. Then there will be some appreciation for Krishna, some of Gyata Sukriti. But if, like we understand in this particular verse, if there's an inimical feelings of resentment, then the problem becomes Vaishnava Paran. On top of all of the negative sanskars that are created in this situation. I'll begin to wrap up here, but there's another one last point I want to make, and that is our spiritual life begins in our relationships with the closest people in our lives. It's very important we understand this, because oftentimes we make I won't say the mistake, but we get lost in our spiritual life. We get lost in our sadhana. We get lost in our spiritual practices. And we do not recognize, or we tend to think that our spiritual practices only take place in the temple. We think that our spiritual practices only take place when we're chanting, or our spiritual practice only takes place when we're reading, or doing puja in the temple. That is a very limited, narrow-minded view of our spiritual life, our spiritual practices. Our spiritual practices actually begin not during Mangalarti, but after Mangalarti. It's very easy to be spiritually aware and cognizant and attentive during Mangalarti. It is very easy to be cognizant and aware during chanting japa, during japa time. It is very easy to listen to Bhagavatam class in the temple. It's very easy to practice Krishna consciousness in the association of many devotees in the temple. Our devotional life really takes hold, or can be experienced after Mangalartik, after Bhagavatam class, after we've put down the japa beads. When we go home and our husband acts like an idiot, right? We go home and our wife does something crazy. We go home and our family members, our in-laws, have been insulting and demeaning to us. That is when our Krishna consciousness begins. That is when our spiritual life begins. Because these are opportunities to live Bhakti Yoga. These are the opportunities to serve the message of Krishna in the situations where we are confronted with negative interactions. 2 years ago, I was having a conversation through Facebook, an interaction through Facebook with a friend. She lives in Sweden. And the Mataji, she actually runs the temple there, and she's one of the managers there in the temple in Almvik in Sweden. We're good friends. And she was telling me, and we were having this exchange about chanting japa. And she was chanting, we were doing Kartik, the Kartik Vrata, the Kartik month. And she was chanting, she had made this vow, her Damodar Vrata, her Kartik Vrata was to chant 64 rounds a day. And so she inspired me. So I also took up the Vrata of chanting 64 rounds a day for the month of Kartik. And we did it together, and it was a wonderful experience. It was, needless to say, a very difficult experience because those of us who also have to work at the same time, my entire day was either chanting japa and going to work and literally no time for anything else. So obviously, it was very difficult. And my wife, very, very understanding, very supportive, and no problem with it. And she was very, very encouraging. I could not have done it without her encouragement. But at the same time, there was also, because I was either working or chanting, many, many things in running a household were not being done, right? Little things. Helping around the house, little things, something break, need to fix, help take care of this, take care of that, which she was not feeling so well. So a lot of things around the house were not being taken care of, not to mention the fact that she was getting none of my attention. In the usual way in a married couple, right? So we were going day after day. I'm still chanting. I'm really getting into the whole name. It was a very wonderful experience. Trying and challenging, but a very wonderful experience nevertheless. The realization came about a month in, or almost about a month into the Damodar Vrata, 2 weeks into chanting 64 rounds. I'm beginning to realize that while my wife is being very supportive, encouraging me every single day. Okay. Being very supportive. So halfway through, I recognize that, well, something is not, my wife is not, there's some issues going on with my wife. She's being supportive, but at the same time, there's some subtle hesitancy developing. So then I sit and I talk with my wife and have a nice discussion, give her some attention, and then but a few days after that, I'm beginning to realize in my chanting, my rounds, 64 rounds, and I'm beginning to think the purpose of why am I doing it? What's the realizations began to come 2 weeks into it, and I began to understand that as important as it is to chant 64 rounds a day during Damodar Vrata, the real Vrat is to chant 64 rounds a day, sure, absolutely, but also bring my wife along with me. Not that she chants 64 rounds, that my experience with chanting 64 rounds is as positive for me as it is for her. In other words, there is no resentment developing. There is no negative feelings developing because I'm chanting 64 rounds. So the challenge was not for me to chant 64 rounds. The realization that the challenge was for me to chant 64 rounds while at the same time serving the needs of my wife. At the same time bringing my wife along so that the positive experience of chanting 64 rounds is not just mine, but also hers, even if she's not chanting. That is what became the Vrata for the last week or 10 days. How to chant the 64 rounds, but at the same time, it must be as positive experience as possible for my wife as well. That was where the chanting actually began. That is where the Vrata really began to have a positive spiritual effect for myself and my wife, for our entire household. It was not picking up my japa and chanting. It was actually knowing when to put my japa beads down and to help my wife in the home. Putting my japa beads down was as important as picking up my japa beads and chanting 64 rounds. This is something, it was a very powerful realization. Very, very powerful realization. And we sometimes, as devotees, we forget this part of our devotional life. Our devotional life begins outside the temple room. Devotional life begins after we put our beads down. Because that's when the opportunities come to actually, the manifestation of our devotion, the manifestation of our maturity has the opportunity to be realized. When the husband is acting foolish, when the wife is doing something crazy, when the in-laws are visiting and insulting and saying so many different things, this is when Krishna consciousness becomes manifest. The maturity of our Krishna consciousness becomes manifest. If we are mature in our Krishna consciousness, all these interactions will be uplifted and transformed. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying stop chanting. Okay, I hope you understand my point here. I'm not saying go. Of course, we go to Mangalarti. Of course, the chanting is. There's nothing more important than chanting our sadhana. Absolutely not. But it doesn't end there. Is my point. It doesn't end there. What we do, how we live when we put our japa down, we're not in the temple. How we interact with our immediate family members is as important as the japa we chant in the temple. Is as important in our Krishna conscious life, our spiritual life. Because, and that's very important, we must keep this in mind. Here in the United States, there is a branch is the wrong word. There is an initiative called the Krishna West Initiative. It's a wonderful program by Hridayananda Maharaj. But some of the people that follow the Krishna West ideology, but the Krishna West idea, sometimes some of them do not know how to express it very clearly, or they say that the reason why Krishna consciousness in the United States is not doing as well as it could be doing is because of, well, we're wearing dhotis, and they have some idea like this. I'm not going to get into that. We don't need politics. What's really at issue is not what devotees are or are not wearing, so they wear dhotis or not. What's really at issue is that we have been, here in the United States, in my opinion, is that we have been unable to connect the quality of our lives with our spiritual activity. We understand that point. We have decoupled, we have separated our Krishna consciousness, our Krishna conscious philosophy, our Krishna conscious practice. We have separated that from the quality of our lives, right? In the United States, many, many devotees are going through family difficulties, divorces, personal career difficulties, yet at the same time, practicing Krishna consciousness. And people recognize this. When I was serving as a president of the Boston Temple, we had and this is why I have a little, I see things differently from some of the Krishna West devotees. Sometimes it was said, the reason why devotees are not coming to ISKCON Temple in the United States is because we're dressed in such a way. That is not entirely correct. Here in the Boston Temple, a little quick story. There's an event in Boston. Boston is a very liberal, that's an understatement. Boston is quite a liberal state in the United States. And they're at the forefront of this marijuana thing. We're not going to go into this whole issue about marijuana. But anyways, they have this festival in September, every fall. And the center of town is a large park. The center of town is overrun by college students, and they're all smoking marijuana. So we would go there, and we have a tent, and we have kirtan, and we serve prasadam to all these kids. And after the event. At the end of the day, we have a kirtan from our tent back to the temple. And every single year we do this, we have this kirtan back to the temple. We bring along 10, 15, 20 students back to the temple. And they come to the temple, we have kirtan, prasadam, and over the next several weeks and even months, these children, these kids, or the college kids, they keep coming. Not just college kids, but many people, they just keep coming. But what happens is there is a recognition that while the philosophy, the teachings, the practice of Krishna consciousness is so profound, is so uplifting, but they also recognize that we have not shown the joy that Krishna consciousness brings to life outside of the temple. We are unable to show the examples of devotees who live wonderful, successful lives in a way that is, what's the term? Not obviously in the temple, right? Not obviously Krishna consciousness. We want to see, what does this mean outside the temple? How is Krishna consciousness? What does a devotee look like who is not in the temple, right? What is the quality of their life? Many times I would have these young people, they would come to the temple, and few of them I would have them move into the temple to experience temple life. This was both a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing because they got to learn so much about Krishna consciousness. The curse was that many devotees in the temple were unhappy in their personal life. When these newcomers, the difficulties that devotees were having in their personal lives, in their personal relationships, they became disillusioned, if you will. So the point I'm trying to make is that the quality of our sadhana, the quality of our spiritual maturity will reflect in our everyday life. It will reflect in our relationships. It will reflect in our marriage. It will reflect in the quality of our work. If our relationships are not uplifting and transformative, if our work life is not uplifting and transformative, then we must recognize that our devotional life is somehow lacking. It is impossible that we can have greatly uplifting devotional lives, but all of our other relationships are floundering. Something is not connected correctly. Something is not right. When we have a powerful sadhana and a mature Krishna consciousness, that is going to translate inevitably in the quality of our relationships. I spend some time coaching devotees and non-devotees here in the United States. And I was coaching one lady just yesterday. And she's not a devotee, she's a Christian. Wonderful, wonderful lady. But she knows I'm a devotee, and I share my Krishna conscious philosophy, much of Krishna conscious philosophy with her. And I've been coaching her spiritually for about 2 years now. She's been having some difficulties, always had difficulty in her marriage. And she has I would say the habit that when something goes awry in her marriage, she tries to throw herself into her Christian and spiritual practices. And I keep trying to remind her that yes, you have to recommit yourself to your spiritual practices. But why is it that the quality of the spiritual practice are not translating into the quality of your relationship with your husband? What is the disconnect? And we always have to have this discussion going back and forth. Why is not the quality, what's wrong with her spiritual practices that is not translating into a positive effect or result in her marriage? It is the same for us devotees in Krishna consciousness. The maturity in our spiritual development, the greater our spiritual development, greater, more transformative our relationships must be. If our relationships are falling apart, we are dissatisfied in our everyday life, we are unfulfilled, yet we're chanting 64 rounds a day, something is not properly connected. Something is missing somewhere. As we mature in our devotional life, as we mature in bhakti, it will naturally, we are not living two different lives. We are living one existential experience. It's not that we have our spiritual life on this hand and our non-spiritual life, our material life on the other. We have to get rid of that mentality. It is a very, very pervasive idea that we lead two different lives. No, we lead one life. This is one existential experience. Our spiritual life, the quality of our spiritual life, the quality of our sadhana, the level of our realizations in our spiritual life, so to speak, will inevitably affect the quality of our non-spiritual life or our life outside of the mandir. It is a very powerful lesson I learned when I was doing that 64-round chanting in Kartik. It's one thing to chant 64 rounds a day, but if it's destroying or having a negative impact on my marriage, I'm missing the point. If my devotional activities are having a negative impact on my relationships, I'm missing the point. Something is not properly connected. I'm missing the key. I'm missing the key. There is no reason for a spiritually mature person to have, now of course, it takes, if you're living, if everyone has free will. You cannot, no matter what you do, right, everyone has free will, right? You can be doing, even Lord Nityananda and Haridas Thakur had Jagai Madai, right? There's always a Jagai Madai. There's nothing you can do about it. But, even so, to be spiritually mature, there is a positive effect. It has a positive effect. It must have a positive effect on the relationships around us. And I'll come back to this end on the verse, today's verse. Coming back to the point, Lord Shiva is telling Sati, this is the relationship we're in. Your father does not appreciate me. He is overcome by pride. He is overcome by his ego. And he's going to do or say something that's going to hurt you. Two aspects of this is, number one, these negative feelings are going to harm both Daksha and Sati. So it's best, what Shiva is saying, for Sati to avoid it. Avoid that encounter. If the encounter is avoided, then at least those samskars and asanas do not take root, either for Daksha or Sati. Second is that Vaishnavanam Yathasambhu, right? Shiva is a Vaishnava. When there's resentments, insults, these things lead to Vaishnava. They are Vaishnava Parad. And Vaishnava Parad destroys a person's devotional development. So we have to be cognizant of our spiritual life and how our spiritual life is affecting others. Our spiritual life should be uplifting not only for ourselves, it should be uplifting for others. When my mother told me to get my grandmother to love me and my grandmother would love Krishna, she was correct. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago, or more, 5 years ago. And when my grandmother passed away, my mother was there. My mother was with my grandmother for the final 3 or 4 weeks. My grandmother was lucky enough to pass away at home. And my grandmother wanted my mother to chant japa by, my grandmother was a Christian, a devout, strict Christian. She wanted my mother to chant japa next to her bed. And that's all my mother did for the last 3 weeks of my grandmother's passing. Every day my grandmother would say, are you going to chant to me today? Are you going to chant to me today? Because there was a loving relationship she had with my mother and with myself, there naturally an appreciation for Krishna developed. So we must be cognizant that as we grow, as we mature in our Krishna consciousness, it must have a positive effect in our relationships. It will have a positive effect. But we just have to be aware and cognizant. And if we are not transforming our relationships, again, there are jagai marais everywhere, but generally if we are not being able to positively affect the relationships around us, is because we are missing the point of our sadhana. We are being like the way I was in the beginning of my 64-round vrat, right? First 2 weeks, I ignored my wife. I'm chanting. I chanted 64 rounds every single day for 2 weeks, not realizing that the most important part of that vrat was to actually put down my japa and engage with my wife as necessary. And make sure the experience was as positive for me as it was for her, even though she's not chanting. So now, every card she asks me, are you going to do your 64-round chanting? Because it was a positive experience for her as well. And she didn't chant 64 rounds a day. Every single year, are you going to do it this year? Are you going to do it this year? And she asks with anticipation because it was a positive experience for her as well. That is what I learned from chanting 64 rounds that time. If I had remained chanting 64 rounds with my limited, narrow view, I would have chanted 64 rounds for the entire month, certainly. But my wife would have become daksha, in the sense that she would have an inimical experience, a negative experience, and therefore an inimical reaction to my wanting to chant it again. It is very, very important we understand this. And it doesn't mean I continued. I chanted the entire month. I did 64 rounds every day. It was much more difficult. I had to learn how to reschedule things. But now it is a positive experience for both of us. We both move that much closer to Krishna. So I'll end there and leave some time for questions and comments.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Very wonderful class, Prabhuji, and very nice points you said. Like your grandmother said that, your mom said that make them love you and they will love Krishna. That is a very good point, Prabhuji. All our relatives we also have relatives. They are not so Krishna conscious and they don't really appreciate what we do. But we have to be just nice with them.
Yes, that's true. That's true. This is something I've learned from personal experience.
Yeah. Hare Krishna, I request all the devotees, if they have any questions or comments for Prabhuji, they can go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, koti pranam to your seva, Hari Bol, Dandat pranam, all Guru Srila Prabhupada and Gurudev. Wonderful class, Prabhuji, as usual, Hari Bol. Thank you very much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much. Thank you for the service. I really appreciate sharing and associating with all of you like this.
Dandat pranam, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Dandat pranams. Hare Krishna, am I audible?
I can hear you.
Okay. It was an awesome class. I have joined first time. I'm Mrs. Mahi Mehta from Chandigarh, and I've been connected from Chandigarh via Premras Prabhuji. I just had one question. When you were speaking about Vaishnava Aparadh, how do we deal with the person who has done aparad towards us, if we come face to face with that person later on in life or while doing some Krishna Seva together in the temple.
So how to deal when someone has committed aparad towards you?
Yes.
Question?
Yes.
Yes, that's a very good question. I'm going to be blunt.
Okay.
As Vaishnavas, we should not. I'm going to change the word. I'm going to use the word, instead of saying, how can we deal with persons who make an aparad towards us? Because that kind of understanding is actually going to get us into trouble. Because it's like it's when we think that we are the center, then we see that people are making aparads towards me. But let's also be practical. People do offend us, right? People say things to us, they do things, and we become offended.
Right.
So now, getting on what should we do about it? First of all, don't think of it as aparad, that they're committing aparad to you. Because think like that, then what you're going to do is you're going to increase your own pride. And that's going to be a problem. So we don't want to increase pride. But let's be practical. People always get on our nerves, right? People say things, do things, and make us upset. The key dealing with this is we become offended, and it's based on pride. This is the key issue here, is pride. We think that this person has said something, even if that person is wrong, right? They did something wrong, is wrong, but at the same time, we have to, from our side, we have to think, I am being proud. There's something by myself here that is a problem. Now, Krishna talks about this. Again, actually, I'll take it to the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. All problems come from an attachment. Buddhism is very big on this. Buddhism talks all about attachments. But we know this from the second chapter of the Gita, when Krishna says, chapter 6, text 62 and 63. At the end of that regression, at the end, Krishna says they fall down in a material pool. But in the beginning, it all started with an attachment. Right? Because let's be practical. I have an example. I am attached. I come to work late, and my boss says, Mahavishnu, you are late, and he sits me down and he chastises me because I'm late, and everyone is watching me be chastised because I'm late. Now, practically speaking, he does not have to make a public scene and insult me, right? He can send me an email, he can say in private or something, but he does it in public. So, truthfully, he is actually wrong. But there's another thing that I must look at. That is, there is an attachment. I am attached to something. I may be attached to my prestige. I don't want to be chastised in public. I may be attached to an idea that I am always on time, and I don't want my reputation to be destroyed or negatively impacted. So when we are feeling some kind of offense, insult, it always leads to some attachment. So the problem is always our attachment. Now, it is not to say that the boss is not wrong. That is, the problem is that whether the boss is wrong is not, that is not in our control. Right? We have no control over the other person. The only thing we have control over is our attachment.
Right.
It is our attachment that is the problem. If we don't have the attachment, there is no upset. If we don't have the attachment, there is no insult. If someone says, Mahavishnu, you are an idiot, right? Mahavishnu, you're an idiot. The offense comes because I am attached to being known as intelligent. I may or may not have control over the other person. I may not be, if I have no control, what can I do? If I have some control, maybe I can hit him on the head or who knows, right? But really the control comes is I can only deal with my attack. So, let's make this more practical. This is all theory. practically speaking, someone insults you, you can tell them to stop. What is the story of Narad Muni, right? Narad Muni had a disciple, was the snake, and the boys, because the snake was a disciple of Narad Muni, he was non-violent, right? He would not bite the villagers. So the boys in the village, they understood this, so they would beat the snake, throw rocks at the snake. So the snake, the cobra, went to Narad Muni and says, my dear Guru Maharaj, they're doing like this. So Narad Muni says, well, raise your hood. You don't have to bite, but raise your hood and show your fangs. Sometimes we have to do this. Sometimes we have to, especially if it's our service. I serve as sometimes in a situation, if we're parents, right? If we're the leader in a temple or organization, sometimes we have to, like the snake, we have to show our fangs to correct. But also the second part, is we also must make sure we are not dealing or working from an attachment of our own. It is very important. Right. I have one last thing on this question because it's a wonderful question. The Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is not about Arjuna fighting, not fighting, should he go to war, not go to war. That is not the point. The point Krishna is trying to get Arjuna to understand is, be pure. Do not fight with attachment. Attachment is the problem, not the fighting. The fighting is secondary. It's concern, but that's secondary. The primary concern is the attachment. So in the same way, people may insult us, may offend us. That's there. And sometimes we have to tell them to stop. Don't say like this, don't do like this. But what is most important is we have to identify our attachment, because that's where the problem is.
I see. Yes. Yes, I could hear you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Go ahead, Mataji, go ahead.
Hare Krishna, I can hear.
Yes, very wonderful presentation with lots of realization. So it was very wonderful to hear early morning. And, Prabhu, I just one perspective I want to share regarding the question Mataji asked from Chandigarh.
Please, yes.
We want to thank her for joining from India and making this conference international. You know what really matters is our realization. And your class was filled with lots of realization in personal life. So that helps. Theory we know, we hear so many questions and many things, but the perspective may help, So one perspective is how big are we?
How what?
How big is one? When the offense comes, when we become offended, who is causing the offense? Actually, nobody has the capacity to offend us or anyone, because literally we are so utterly small. So how can anyone offend us? But only, as you said so wonderfully, it's our pride. Pride is so big. So the big thing becomes offended. Big things become hurt. But I am so utterly small, I cannot pinpoint even where I am. So how can I be offended? Nobody has the capacity to offend me, except my own ignorance. So the whole idea is to remind oneself all the time that when people are causing disturbance and saying something or acting in a particular way, one point has to be very clear. If you are the authority over that person, then it is also your duty to correct them and help them. But if anyone else, nobody comes out of his way and tells you or does something, only with the surrounding, our family people, friends and society, whatever. So if anybody is telling you something that you are small, then one should be reminded, yes, I am smaller than you can think how small I am. So that's where the offense, to become offended, it is our own problem. But we must be very careful not to offend anybody on the same token, understanding that they are Krishna's part as parcel. But on our part, we can think if somebody is telling you are very small, you are not that important, and it should be a good reminding. Yes, this is what I have heard in practice, and you are reminding me. I have heard in theory, but you are reminding in practice, which is very difficult to digest. So thank you for reminding. And so we can be grateful. But the context, what I want to share, if your child is offending, telling you something, or if you somebody who is dependent, and if you are the supervisor or the manager, and somebody is, then it is also your duty. Internally, you can think that yes, you are not the boss, you are not the supremo, Krishna is the supreme, but as a duty, you have to also act accordingly. But otherwise, you can be thankful from the heart that somebody reminded that you are small, you are not that important, which we are not anyway. Right.
Thank you. That was you're right. Absolutely correct.
Thank you so much for clearing the doubt. And I was just told by my superiors, my counselors out here, that it all depends as to how the approach of the person is after offending you or after offending any person. It's better to respond than to react when they come face to face. So I didn't get much clarification on this matter, hence I posted the question. And thank you so much for including me in the online classes, and it was an awesome lecture. It's very nice connecting to all of you. Thank you so much.
I have a quick question. Can you actually clarify for me the second part of that? You were instructed to what was the second part of that? I did not understand.
I beg your pardon. The question or the second part of my conversation?
Yes, the second part of your conversation.
Uh-huh.
How to respond?
Oh, well, I was told by my counselors or the leaders that if somebody offends you or if somebody offends any devotee, and in doing a personal or communal seva together, when you come face to face, it's always best to see how the approach of the person is and then accordingly respond. So
yes.
Kind of makes you very safe, and again,
right.
It also does not make you get into the vicious cycle of Vaishnava Aparadh.
Right. That's entirely correct. And on that point, I'd like to add, we've just actually celebrated Nrsimha Chaturdashi, Nrsimha Jayanti, and in that story of Nrsimhadev's appearance day, Jai and Vijay, they stopped the four Kumaras from seeing Vishnu, from going into Vaikuntha. And we must remember, it's actually very important for those who are leaders or even not leaders, just all of us, we must remember that the offense of Jai and Vijay was that they actually stopped the four Kumaras from seeing Vishnu. And the understanding is that there's no enemies in Vaikuntha. Right? No enemies in Vaikuntha. So why are Jai and Vijay not there to stop people from entering? They are there to encourage people, to help people enter. So even when devotees, and I like the way you mention your counselor has instructed, I think it's very, very important that while someone may be offending us, or we may be offended by something that they do, and as the Prabhuji mentioned, we have to be mindful of pride, be aware of our attachment, But we also have to deal, as your counselor mentioned, according to their mood, if they're in an angry mood or this mood or that mood. But the most important thing, and I cannot stress this enough, the most important thing is that we must behave in a way that they continue to want to serve Krishna. That is of utmost.
Right.
Because
the seva should go on.
Yes, the seva should go on, and it should go on in the proper mood. So your counselor is right. If they're angry and they're not in a mood to listen to what you have to say, then better not say anything. Go away and let them serve and as long as they're going on serving. And then maybe later you can go and say something. The key it is the greatest offense we can do to Vaishnavas and also to Krishna is when we stop or discourage others from serving Krishna. That is the whole Jaya Aparad was they were stopping the four Kumaras from serving Vishnu, from seeing Vishnu. That we must not do, even if we are. So that also has to be in our mind when we're dealing with other people, whether we're leaders, not leaders. Our service is to bring people closer, more closer to Krishna.
Right. What would be the repercussions of stopping the service?
If the repercussions for stopping the service is we seek the service. We can no longer serve. Service is a privilege. Service is a privilege that I earned. I Gurukul class here in the temple in Massachusetts. We had 10 Gurukul students. And, children like to get involved. They like to do things, and, they like to do things when they get involved somewhere, not just to sit in a classroom and learn mantras. They like to serve prasadam. They like to help clean the deity paraphernalia, the lamps, this and the other. I don't let them. The reason why I don't let them is because I want to let them understand this principle, just as I was taught, that service is a privilege. It is a privilege that has to come. It has to be something that is given out of love, unconditional love. So we have to want it and we have to treasure it. So when we deny other service, when we discourage them from serving, what happens? Service is taken away from us because we do not recognize the privilege that we have of serving. Again, this pride comes in the way. When we offend devotees, then Maya, the energy of the Lord, removes us from the presence of devotees, so we no longer offend devotees. When we stop devotees from serving, when we discourage devotees from serving, then the energy of the Lord removes us from service, because that is seva aparad.
Right.
Stop devotees from stop others to serve in their capacity, right? We know the story of Srila Prabhupada in the early days of ISKCON. The drunk man, he was completely in drugs. All his service he could do was bring toilet paper.
Right, yeah.
Some people wanted to stop him, but Prabhupada said, no, that is his service.
No, service, right, true.
So we have to encourage, we never, ever, ever should discourage, hamper. That is, and that's also for those of you who may be leaders, it's very difficult. You know this, to how to deal with people who don't know how to serve. You want to encourage them to serve, but then there's some. But if you're not a leader, you're very lucky.
Yeah, I'm happy being at the receiving end, receiving knowledge, receiving guidance. It's very safe, you see. The path to Golok opens up quickly.
Yeah, so true. It's so true.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Hari Hari.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. What is your name? Or what is, you just asked the question, Mataji?
Yes, I'm Mrs. Mahi Akhil Mehta. I'm from Chandigarh.
Mataji, we welcome you in our conference call by chanting Hare Bol 3 times. Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Hare Bol,
Hare Bol, Hare Bol, Hare Bol. Thank you so much.
Mataji, and also give your association every day in conference call, Mataji.
Yes, yes, so I will be coming and attending online. Thank you for connecting me. it was wonderful, because here we don't have people who preach in English much. So I have a lot of difficulty in following Hindi, and I'm so happy to be connected. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Hare Krishna.
Thank
Prabhuji.
you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, very, very wonderful advice you poured out. You echoed Bhakti Visiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and practically Srila Prabhupada demonstrated that mood. And because one thing is, our swarup is that we are the facilitators. So we cannot afford to unfacilitate anybody's participation in service, even in their conditioned state or imperfect stage. The whole purpose of this Krishna consciousness is to facilitate others. So how mature one is, how much he is able to facilitate others. And one slogan which we always say, one should remind oneself that I am not the most important person. And I say every day, every morning, I wake up and I just remind myself, I am not the most important person. At least we know that.
Yes.
And that releases all the tension, all the hold up against so many and different things, because we go through so many emotions in life, and things that, oh, why, how could he do this to me, or how could he say this to me? But I'm not the most important person, so I can adjust with that. And facilitating, only by facilitating, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, we experience felicitation. The delight of Krishna consciousness one experiences only by facilitating others in whatever way, and not making oneself the most important person. Anytime, any stage, any time, any space.
Yes, well said, well said.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Mahavishnu Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
This is Kamundaki Dasi from Baltimore. I wanted some advice. Like if somebody, kind of very mild person, and has a inclination toward Krishna consciousness, so then, but how can I help her to that the person becomes kind of fixed in this endeavor, and not get deterred by other whatever comes on the way.
So how to help a person begin to engage in service? And
begin, and how to make the person fix on that path, this path of Krishna consciousness has started. So then, because there's so many hurdles comes around, and person is not so kind of physically or mentally so strong to oppose or just say something like that I cannot do this. I don't have enough strength to do. I want to do some my sadhana, and then I can do like that. Whatever I can do, I will do. Physically, person is so strong, and like that. So then that person, how I can help to become, prioritize the Krishna consciousness.
Okay. Yes, my service has always been, as you know, I grew up in Gurukula, and I began teaching in Gurukula, and that has always been my favorite service. And I'm lucky that Krishna has allowed me to open up a Gurukula here. And one thing, when I was being trained to be a Gurukula teacher, Gurukula Maharaj, Bhakti Vijayapurna Swami, he was training us. He was saying, the most important thing you can do to help the children is to watch them play. Watch them play. Because when watching them, paying attention to them, you get an understanding of what they like to do. You get an understanding of their personality, of their nature when we watch them at play. In the Gurukula here, where I serve and teach, You're very right. It's actually quite difficult for those who do not appreciate this. It is very difficult to engage someone in devotional activities, devotional life, without really spending time to getting to know that particular person. In the very beginning, especially for people who are spiritually weak, mentally not or intellectually not as energetic as we may want, in the beginning it can be very difficult to get them and have them remain stable and steady and mature in Krishna consciousness. That is really the quality, that is a defining quality of a guru. The guru has the ability to, and I'm not talking about initiating guru. I'm not talking in that sense. I'm saying
I understand.
Yes, a teacher must become expert in seeing the person's nature, what they like to do, and constantly engaging that nature in spiritual, in seva, Krishna conscious activities. And Mataji, you're right, it's very, very difficult. Even now, I mean, I've had many years of experience with Gurukul teaching, and even now, when I make the lesson plans for Gurukula, I have to make the lesson plan keeping into consideration each and every child in the class, that how long I can do this project, that project, what can I engage in here, how can I engage in there. It is a full meditation on how to keep these children happily engaged in Krishna service. That is actually, add just one point, a quick story. I know we're well beyond time, but a quick story. When I was in the Mayapur Gurukul, it was, the year is not important. Mayapur Gurukul was going through a transition, and there was no principal at the time. It was in the early or mid-90s, anyways. It was going through a transition. There was no principal. I, oddly enough, was I wasn't the most senior person, but I was the senior most teacher. I had been there in the Gurukul the longest. So they had gotten a principal who was supposed to come from Australia, but the principal was having visa problems. So there was no one who knew the Gurukula. I knew it because I'd been there for 15 years, and I happened to be a teacher, even though I was not the oldest. I was 20-something, 24, 25. They had me as acting principal. I don't know whose idea that was, but they had me as the acting principal, 24. I had no idea what I was doing. I went to Harikesh Maharaj, who was one of the GBC at the time, and I said, he was my Guru Maharaj at the time. I said, Guru Maharaj, I have no idea, what do I do? And he said something that still to this day has been the guiding principle of all my managerial services. He said, Mahavishnu, do two things. Make sure everyone is happily engaged in Krishna's service. And he said, that's two things. They should be happy and satisfied. They should be happy and satisfied. Make sure they're happy and satisfied as much as you can make it so, and make sure they're engaged in Krishna service. If you can do those two things, you will be a perfect manager. Now, of course, I didn't, but that's the question you're asking, Mataji. How to get people to be happily engaged in Krishna service. And the only way to do that, it is not a mistake, it is not a chance that the very first process of the 9 processes in Krishna consciousness is Shravanam, hearing. We must, in guiding devotees, the most important thing we can do is actually shut up. It's not to say anything, but to listen. The first day of Gurukul class, I always bring all the kids in, and there's no class. We sit, and I just let them do whatever they want. We all sit and talk, basically, and I just let them talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, because while they're talking, I'm learning about them. All new students, I let them come in and let them just talk and talk and talk and do whatever they want for that period of class, so I get to learn about them. When we have this responsibility of guiding people through seva, the only thing and the most important thing we must do is listen, listen, and listen, because they will give us clues as to how they want to be engaged. Even the most mentally, intellectually, physically challenged person has something that they are passionate about. If we listen and understand what that is, then we have to be creative to figure out how we can engage what they are already passionate in. Right? Krishna did not tell Arjuna to go to the forest and take sannyas. It was just the opposite. Krishna said, go to war. Armed with yoga, stand and fight. That was Krishna's instruction. You're right, Mataji. That's a very, very difficult. That is the question of all questions in Krishna consciousness. How to properly engage so that people remain satisfied, happily engaged in Krishna consciousness, satisfied in Krishna consciousness. That is what the guru does. That is what the teacher, the leader, the acharya does. How to engage. And the only way to do that is by first listening, and understanding who they are, and then being creative, taking their nature and somehow engaging it in some connection to Krishna.
Very wonderful discussion. Very wonderful.
Very, very nice. Very answer.
Mataji reminds me of one sloka from Bhagavad Gita. Can I share?
Yes, please.
Yes.
You know, of all the 700 slokas, the sloka which captured my so much attention, absorption, thought, and expansion is 250. Chapter 250. Buddhi yukto jahati hai, ubhe sukrit dushkrite. Tasmad yogaye yujyasva, yoga karmasu kaushalam.
Kaushalam.
So the expertise of our work, actions, thought, and everything is the barometer is how much yoga or in love we fall with Krishna. So if our consciousness is charged with yoga or love for Krishna, then we absolve ourselves from both sukriti and duskriti of this world. Because identification in duality, either we like something or dislike something, and we see something, somebody is favorable, somebody is unfavorable. This emotion goes on and on. But if our heart is filled with love with Krishna, then we won't imbibe anything so-called negative energy coming from other souls. Rather, we will end up sharing our heart-filled Krishna consciousness to the other person. Because interaction we cannot avoid. Interaction has to be there. You know, we have to help everybody. But how much filled up with Krishna consciousness we are, so that has to be addressed. And if we are ready for full-fledged Krishna consciousness, then we have to face and analyze our situation, and not so much others judgmenting about others, but only oneself. How can I help? If I am not filled up with Krishna consciousness, how can I help others? So better be prepared, all of us, with full-fledged Krishna consciousness. Then and then alone, Krishna will use us, Guru Maharaj will use us to expand their mission through us as an instrument. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji, Mahavishnu Prabhuji, and Govinda Madhav Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Hare Bol Dandavad.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Very, very wonderful class and very, very wonderful question answers. And I hope we all join again tomorrow. Let's pay our obeisances to all the Vaishnavas. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva patitanam pavanebhyo
Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Jai
Krishna.